it's a pleasure to be back at the Cove Book Festival. This is my local. I grew up in Dumbarton, so I always feel that this is like a special place.
My granddad was from Dumbarton.
Well, there you go. And it's also a huge pleasure to introduce this lady. I mean, I've known Liz for the 3 decades that I've worked at BBC Scotland. I've known her as a poet, as a playwright, an outspoken voice on a whole range of subjects. But obviously I was aware, as most of you will be as well, that her voice had been heard for decades before that. She was very, very young when she started. Inspirational in her own right, but also paving the way for so many other women writing, people like Ali Smith, Kathleen Jamie, Jackie Kay, all acknowledge the huge influence that Liz has had in breaking through. This, I should squeeze in as well about the sponsorship before we move on to talking about the book. This event is sponsored by Helensburgh Toyota, who've been a loyal sponsor of the Book Festival since it started 11 years ago. Very grateful to them and all the other sponsors this weekend who make the Book Festival possible. And this morning we were particularly looking at this latest volume, or Handsel, which is something of a landmark, bringing together Liz's pretty much entire back catalogue, good chunk of all the work that she's written, including new work for the first time since 2016. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, another warm welcome for Liz LOCHHEAD.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Liz, you're always good at introducing us to new or old Scots terms. Tell us first off about Handsel, what the title, the Handsel, actually means.
Well, A Handsel, to me, I didn't think up the title. It was my editor, actually. Said, I want to call it A Handsel. And I said, OK. Because I just thought, it was just bad enough trying to get the book out, you know. I mean, I use Handsel as a word in some of the poems. I mean, A Hansel's remember they used to give a half-crown to babies, you know, that was a Handsel. You know, it's just a small present of welcome of some sort, a good luck. Yeah, in fact, I've got a Handsel on here, a wee plastic Scotty dog that my pal Siobhan Redmond gave me recently, and because I've been through quite a stressful time, it stays on, you know, tucked into my simmet all the time. She knows that. It was just sort of last month or more. She always brings you something from this shop in London called Tatty Divine. And first I had it on back to front without the glitter on. So I don't take it off because it would go the wrong way round, you know.
And
that's a Handsel.
What was it like to gather everything in this one volume? Were you nervous about having to kind of go back over all the stuff that you'd written to bring out this book?
My editor found all the stuff. I was nervous enough about the whole idea. Once again, that wasn't my idea. Just before that, I had brought out, and I meant to bring one of them in the stage. It might be in my rucksack at the corner. A copy of, there was a 50th anniversary of Memo for Spring. A wee pink rucksack in there. It might be in it. I might not have put one in this morning. You don't have to. No, it's nobody. Never mind. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that was traumatic. That was just after my 74th birthday. I knew that was going to happen because I was 24 when Memo for Spring came out. I was 24 in 1972. So anybody that can do mental arithmetic, I'll know that they'll think I'm 77, but I'm not 77 till next month. You know, it's the very end of the year. I wasn't nervous. I was thrilled that was going to happen, but they wanted me to write an introduction for that. And that took me the whole month of January and a bit of, you know, it was late coming from it because it was really difficult to remember the start of things. And it was weird. There'll be one at the bookshop actually. I mean, maybe. Anyway, it was a sort of replica of the first book, which was, some people called it a pamphlet because it didn't really have a spine. There was only 33 poems in it, and it was, you know, whatever. Anyway, writing that thing, which was in prose and it was personal, was really, for some reason, very traumatic. And I read it the other day and I thought, God, it reads as if I'd just written it in an afternoon. And it goes incredibly well with what Ali Smith, my friend, wrote about. It was like we'd planned it, but we didn't, in any way, whatever. So that had been so traumatic that it was the very beginning of last year, of 2023, that I heard that Hugh Andrew, I think, who's the boss of Polygon, he said, no, we're not going to reprint that. We're going to do a collected. And so Edward, my editor, and I had to, I didn't have to write any introduction for that. So it didn't bother me about that. But what bothered me was when he gathered them all together, it was all digitally. Then when they were put together, all the line endings ended up in the wrong place, and we needed a professional proofreader, and that was so I didn't even look at them as poems. They had no effect on me at all. What did have an effect on me was once the book was in press, I was up in Mull with my friend Gordon McLean, who used to run all the music at Antoba, and who's got a wee studio up there in Mull, and I started recording all my poems with him. We've got so far through it, and that was much more, because then I was thinking about them as things, not as a problem with another bloody typo in it, and so I didn't really have any emotional connection with it, because that was a year later after the other thing, which had been so kind of exhausting in a different way. This one was exhausting because I had just come out of hospital and with a new hip, and it wasn't as easy as the first hip had been. It was okay, but it wasn't 6 weeks and I was fine. And I was doing 18 hours sitting at my computer immediately afterwards, and I was getting a row from people for doing that and not doing my exercises enough because it had to get out. And then eventually it was, the day it was to go to the printer, and I said to Edward, we just got to say stop, because he'd sent me the 7th proof set, and I had found 3 typos in the first 15 minutes of looking at it, and I said, they've just got to not go to press on Monday. So it was not at all emotional, but in that kind of way, it was
problematic.
It was, yeah, that's
the word.
Nicely. But it was, it's all been interesting, but once I started to record them with Gordon, I really enjoyed that. Some of them, I could have thought, oh God, who was that about again? Things like that,
Yeah, as a reader, and I
Who'd
suspect...
broke my heart at that point?
Well, I suspect a lot of the audience will feel the same way, that as a reader, it's lovely both to have a collection like this, and it's interesting that different people, I suppose, read poetry in different ways, but I always think that the thing that's I dip into it like a box of chocolates. I'll go back to things that I like, or find something new, or just dip in and out of it. But what is missing for me is hearing you actually read it. So the idea that you've recorded some of the poems appeals to me as well, because there is that thing about the performance versus the page, isn't there, which has always been a thing for you.
I think it's because, not that they're all performance pieces or anything like that, although in a wee minute I'll start with one that just is, and I thought it shouldn't maybe be in the book as a printed thing, but it's always you're writing down a sound. You're not writing down a bit of prose. I mean, that's a sound as well, but it's a sound that I'm not as comfortable with, or not as sure that I'm getting at all right, or so it's voices that you're putting down. It's not always your own voice, but they're often in a persona, There's a certain dramatic element to the things I write. It might not be me speaking. It might be somebody very close to me, but not really me. That's so. The voice is it's the voice of a poet that you know. In fact, I'm going to change from what I was going to do and read a very wee thing because of serendipity. Because I know it's in here. I wasn't in here to read, but I just think, considering what's happening today, this is a favourite poem of mine by Robert Frost. And you might guess what it is. It's one of my favourites. But the thing is, Frost said that poetry is always dramatic it may not openly declare itself so, but it always is. And I think that's true of this one. I think this Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, I don't like to read it as it rhymes, you know, it's just like a ballad system, only a pair of rhymes in every 4 lines. Very simple, but it's, to me, somebody speaking at that moment, you know. So I'm going to read it. It's very short. And I do need my glasses. I don't really.
Which we found.
It's just, yeah, we did find them. Which is why I sometimes print them in a book, print them in a folder. This was for a different reading the other night. This was the farmer's one. But anyway, it's irresistible to think of today reading this and coming out with the argument that what Frost's doing. Whose woods these are? I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. A lot of people read that as a very profound statement, but to me, yes, it is profound, but that's for us to find and the speaker just to be. I think the speaker's just yawning. Yeah. And there's this great story somebody just said about it, that Frost had finished a great big thing and he decided to I haven't finished. He wrote this whole poem just very quickly, but the last stanza, he had a line missing. You know, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And he didn't. He needed another rhyme for, and he just repeated it. You know, saying I'll find the right line tomorrow, and you know, then it became something that people suffer in exams for all over America, and things, you know, which is a horrible thing to think. That's what I hate most about them doing you in school. If people learn to hate it before you start, you know.
And I suppose that kind of takes us back to how you started out in poetry. I mean, tell us first of all about that event that you mentioned about the first publication. So that was an all-day festival.
That's what I would really like. The wee. Is there a bookshop down there?
There's books on sale up in the library.
All right.
And also it's Liz's rucksack there, and I can just see.
But it might not be in. It might not be in there. It's just a wee copy of if the bookshop have got it. It's Memo for Spring. And it would be quite nice. So could we go back to that question?
Yes, absolutely. We'll talk about that afterwards. But in terms of the poetry that you getting interested in poetry, one of the first first poems in the book is about Keats and you becoming interested in poetry even at the age of 14.
I was going to read that. I mean, it's pretty autobiographical, to say the least. And it's probably the first poem I'd written for a while, a few years ago. And it was sort of prompted by Keats's 200th anniversary about to come up. But what I'd been wanting to write about that thing for years, because so it's called Coming to Poetry, an ode. And it was in 1962, at the time of the Cuba crisis. And everybody thought, you know, only people of my age will remember what it was like to think that maybe next week we'll be dead. And why are we not getting strawberries for our tea and a steak? Because what's the point? And everybody at the bus stop still going to their work. And really, it was looking bad. So Coming to Poetry, an ode. Reading you, John Keats, at 70, a heart, pierced again by your beauty that is truth, was truth to me and my 14-year-old heart. Knowing nothing of nightingales, my melting youth still blind to the perfection of a Grecian urn, deaf yet to Darien, Homer, a closed book, burst open to La Belle Dame's song Merci. This night, my thoughts return to that seeming simple as a song ballad, to what it took to have me come to poetry. My joy forever, my truth and terror too. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 62. In English last week, we'd finished St. Agnes Eve. Next week, nuclear obliteration is due. Unless there's a Khrushchev climb down, they don't believe will happen. Countdown to doom. Mr. Valentine read us La Belle Dame, and into the room came yon knight at arms, so haggard and so woebegone, with the lily's pale anguish on his brow, on his cheeks the rose fading, withering like our now. Was it to be all over and done, our 1960s sweetness scarce begun, my warmed jewels never to be unclasped one by one, my fragrant bodice never loosened, nor by degrees my unbuttoned garments fall rustling to my knees. Oh, I longed, as I had never longed before, for my wild eyes to be closed, just once, with kisses 4. I couldn't sleep that night. For next week, we really might, like you, poor dear John Keats, be dead. I remember this so vividly. I'm there, feeling again that middle of the night dread, standing, looking out that window in the hall to where, perhaps soon to be just gone, not here. Under the bluish lamplight, our ordinary street lay weirdly stilled and strange, like a Magritte out of that art book off the school library shelf. In my parents' room, someone else, not sleeping, stirs. We're all scared, but you have to keep it to yourself, though day by day I see those wee tells betray their fears, how they'd looked at each other, nothing said, when Kennedy addressed his nation, a blockade. Now hourly when the news comes on, I know by their clenched attention to the radio, it didn't happen. I am still alive, still hunger for poetry for life. You never got to take sweet, silly, loving Fanny Braun to wife, John Keats. Well, I, who never thought to survive into my beldam years, must needs be stoical at 70. My Tom, dear husband of my heart, taken from me and from this life he loved, an astonishing 10 years ago. I'm here, birds still sing, sometimes. I know, I must try not to yearn, for all the sweetness is gone and past return. So, lovely. Your previous question.
Yes, well, we'll go back to that as well. And the other one, to go back even further and earlier, you talked to it. So the stage you were talking at there was first coming to poetry at the age of 14, but even earlier than that, and you mentioned the Mull recording, you had written, you have a poem called 1952, which gives a sense of the room that you were in at that age. And again, it's that sort of sense of place and what's going on in the world.
The room we were about to get in 1952. I'll do that in this next reading, if we get
yes,
to that.
So we're going to, you're getting an extra reading today, so we'll put that in.
About Norman
but yes, let's jump forward to that. So, this is, for round about that, we're talking about, it's an all-day festival, Poem 72, and you and Norman McCaig
that's
are
before
performing.
my book, this wee book, was out.
And so you were due to perform for 25 minutes, I think.
What does it say?
No, you were due to perform for 15 minutes. Norman McCaig was due to perform for 25, and he said to you, you do 12, I'll do 20, always leave them asking for more. at that moment.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it's quite the paragraph before. I had discovered McCaig for myself at the age of 19 on the poetry shelves of the public library. Unbelievably, as it seems now, I had gone through secondary school without being introduced to the work of any Scottish poet except Burns. And the shelf of slender hardback phoenix pattern covers of those Chateau and Windows volumes of McCaig's, only 2 at a time, as you were allowed out the library. Rings on a tree, riding lights, a round of applause, a common grace, the Sinai sort. They were constantly borrowed by me, returned, fines paid, borrowed again, all through that autumn and winter of 1968. And now, at poem 72, I've just turned 24, the organiser was saying, do 15 minutes, and Norman, you do 25. And it was, the first time you've met a hero. But in faith, I'd been reading them since obviously I was 19. And, all the volumes that they had in, it was the South Side Library, I remember, it was that wee while that I lived there. Norman, you do 12 and I'll do 20. Always leave them wanting more. And he winked. That was very Norman. A bit past in a blur. I was back in my seat in the front row for the first time. It's interesting. Listening, not reading from the page to McCaig. That voice, that timing. A masterclass in the art of performing poetry out loud. And it was out of doing that wee reading, being a support act. The publisher who came and said, have you got enough poems for a collection? I don't know, I hadn't thought, but Alistair Gray had got my things typed up. And, it took about 2 months after that till the wee book came out. And it was a big hit, not because it was that brilliant, but basically because no women were writing poetry. Well, they were writing it, but it wasn't getting published.
Because I think you described yourself as a novelty and lucky.
Yeah,
but
novelty.
obviously
and
that
quite
would
pretty in those days.
Yeah,
and
but
all
that would also
it helped.
But that wouldn't sustain you. It would say you sold copies then, but it wouldn't necessarily kind of keep you going. But it definitely kind of established there. And as so many people said afterwards, you were the sole female voice there. So then you inspire. So Ali Smith said it was amazing to hear, what was it, a poet, a woman, a Scot, and you can be all three. And that was the thing that really struck her, that you were the first person to be able to do that.
It's just things like this. I'll just read a paragraph of Ali's thing. It was 1979. So the book was out for 7 years at that point, obviously. This is Ali Smith. I lived in the Highlands. I was in 5th year at Inverness High School. I loved books. I was clever. I'd learned when to hide both those things. The world was all before me, and I already knew the negotiations we were meant to make, the compromises expected, and my own spirit champing at the bit. One day, our English teacher, Anne Mackay, asked me would I babysit that Saturday night. Course I would, cash in hand. When the adults had gone out and the kids were asleep, I went straight to the bookshelves of our English teacher, the evening spring light still hitting them, to check out one of my most inspiring teacher's books. What was this? A slim stapled book, too thin for its name to be on the spine. Memo for spring, it said in the cover. And Ali always credits me with that. She said that actually on her version of This Cultural Life, because I got loads of emails from people saying, did you hear that? Which of course I was very chuffed, but to be filling an absence, you should be regretting the absence rather than your filling of it.
Yeah, but
and
equally,
I didn't fill it.
Such an important groundbreaking moment, isn't it?
The moment was groundbreaking, but they would have been writing those poems anyway, and they would have broken it a bit later.
Yeah.
I didn't think that I wasn't allowed to write poems being a girl. I mean, I wasn't writing to be published, and I never have been. You're writing to try and get that thing finished. It's itself. And that's enough of an achievement the older you get. Because the ideas for a poem, the ideas for a poem can, like the Keats one, ride around for years. You've got to have an impetus to do it, to get an idea for what connects with something. Sometimes it's the fact that they want this poem for Keats. That gave me a note to talk about Keats and mortality and time and the things I was thinking about at that time. It's a few years old, even that poem. It must have been written not long after I was 70. Well, it was just before the 200th anniversary of, there's Keats. He died before he was 25, and the things that he had produced. And the only thing that I really liked, I liked St Agnes Eve, of course. It's so sensuous and so on. All that sexy stuff about warm jewels falling to her knees. And it's quite a creepy poem. It would be regarded as very un-PC now.
He'd be cancelled.
A peeping Tom. Yeah, he would be cancelled. The character in it, whatever his name is, he would be very, because he spies on a woman undressing and going to bed. It's the women he loves, and she does elope with him, but she could have charged him instead.
And of course, even with Memo for Spring, even with that success in that moment, that's not the beginning of your career as a poet. It's still a few years off. So it's the turning point really is when you go and take that writer in residence course in Canada, isn't it? That's the moment that you kind of go at the age of 30 and you don't go back to teaching and you decide that actually poetry is something that you can do, or writing is something you can do.
I decided writing at that point. I mean, I thought poetry was the sort of thing you would, and it still is true, it was the sort of thing that you would occasionally write when the idea for it came. But it turned out that when I was the Macker, and even before that, being asked to do something gets me kicking and swearing and everything to my desk, but maybe eventually doing it. In fact, I'll do one of them that I know off by heart, I hope. This was commissioned by the BBC Education Department somewhere in London. And what the idea was, that the brief I was sent, was they wanted what would you call it? They wanted a dialect poem for children all over Britain. I said, where did they come from? All over Britain. I thought, oh, how do you do that? A dialect poem. So tried different thes. I weren't working. It gets to the night before the actual deadline, and it was the usual, stay up all night with a cup of tea and go. Carol Ann Duffy stays up all night with a bottle of red wine. Not me. At that point, I get a bottle of red wine if I've managed to write it. Here, it's in there somewhere, but I don't need to look it up. So, once again, it's a spoken thing in a way. And it's not autobiographical, literally. It's culturally autobiographical, I think. Although there's somebody speaking it. It was January, and a guide reich day the first day I went to the school. So my mum happed me up in my good navy blue napcoat with a red tartan hood, birled a scarf around my neck, pooed on my pixie and my pockies. It was that bitter, said, "Noo you'll no starve," gied me a wee kiss and a kid on skelp in the bum, and sent me off across the playground to the place I'd learned to say. It was January, and a really dismal day the first day I went to school. My mother wrapped me up in my best navy blue topcoat with the red tartan hood, twirled a scarf around my neck, pulled on my bubble hat and mittens, it was so bitterly cold, said, "Now you won't freeze to death," gave me a little kiss and a pretend slap in the bottom, and sent me off across the playground to the place I'd learned to forget to say. It was January and a guide reich day, the first day I went to the school. So my mum happed me up in my good navy blue napcoat with a red tartan hood, birled a scarf around my neck, and pooed on my pixie and my pockies. It was that bitter. Oh, saying it was one thing, but when it came to writing it, in black and white, the way it had to be said was as if you were posh, grown up, English, male, and dead.
And that's the nub of it, isn't it, with a lot of what you're writing with Scots? Because you were saying, when we were talking about it last night, you were talking about you weren't necessarily going to write in Scots. You didn't see yourself as...
In fact, seeing as this is now here, I'll read the, so this is for me to know and you to never find out how hard it was, but it was really, it was the whole month or whatever. What did it say? Here's the thing. Here's the glasses again. Oh, there they are. Usually when you're looking for your glasses, they're on your head, up there. There we go. So it goes on, you know, and I'm getting worried about doing it and things like this. Anyway, okay. Once upon a time, there was this girl from Motherwell who had the nerve to write some poems. Who did she think she was? Well, she thought she was leaving Glasgow very soon and wouldn't be living there permanently again. She thought that she knew where she was going and who was going with her. She thought that she had given up on drawing and painting, that she'd gone to art school where she'd somehow lost the urge to be any kind of visual artist, would not be persevering in that line. She thought she would never write anything longer than or anything other than a poem. She thought she would never, hell no, write anything in Scots. I'm glad to say it turned out she was completely wrong about each and every one of those things.
And the performance part of your poetry has always been there from the start. Was that just a natural thing for you? Because you've talked about that, about other poets and what's right for them and not liking sometimes the way people recite, particularly the sing-songy poetry voice.
I hate the poetry voice. Right, let's try Keats with a wee bit of the poetry voice. Not Keats, what do you call him? Robert Frost. Just to see if I could go for the worst of that.
Yeah.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods, it's not even that, it's a kind of vicar's voice they picked up. You know, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. I hate that.
Yeah, me too.
I never thought I would do that.
But it's what it also puts people off poetry, doesn't it? It's
puts
what
me off poetry.
In schools, if you're reading it in that way, it's the thing. And actually, when you know, and I have tried quite often, if I'm in a safe space, I will quietly read your poems aloud, because I do think that it's better to hear. And your voice is so clear in it; it is impossible to read your poetry in that style, because it isn't done in a sing-song voice. It is in your own natural speak. Most of them in the speaking voice.
You've got to get a rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, I suppose the first poem, I was just remembering that this week. You know, so it's a rare memory that the first thing I remembered writing was a Valentine for my first boyfriend. So I met him when I was 15 and he was 19. He was so lovely and so gentle and so sweet, and you know, used to come up from Troon in a scooter to take me to the pictures and then drive me back home, deliver me to my mum and dad. He was the sweetest man. I'm sure he still is, if he's still alive. Anyway, it was Valentine's Day, so I started to write, you know, a Valentine, and it was a rhyming thing. And I remember the thing, you know, was about the fun of doing the rhyming. It was a big long thing, you know, and it was the rhyme. And I didn't ever rhyme again until Tartuffe, the play in 1980. 40 years ago, I was working on that, the first thing that I ever, the first long thing that I did. So by the time I did the poem there, you know, the one starts in English, you know, the round, you know, Michael Finnegan, Begin Again poem. By the time I did that, I'd already done Tartuffe and things, and had taken on board that sometimes the voice would sometimes be in Scots, you know. But that was when I got back, when doing that was when I got back to rhyming again. And I mean, I often rhyme, you know, even real. The Keats thing is not a Keatsian ode, it's more like a, what's his name, Coleridge ode, because he was a bit more irregular, you know. I mean, because Keats did it perfectly in iambics and a rhyme scheme and in a, you know. So with the most I can usually use couplets, but, you know, at least it's something towards rhyming. But they've still got to be off, you know, you don't have every sentence ending, you often take it over, even although it's... And when I started, after Memo for Spring, it started to be that I couldn't write for a while without a rhyme that was even a kind of almost hidden rhyme. but do you want to hear the one I was going to start
Yes,
with?
yes,
Have we
yes.
got time for it?
Yes, of course.
How's the time going, Pauline?
The time is going fine. We have plenty of time, I think, haven't we?
Right, okay, well, it'll take a wee while. Because this is the most recent rhymer. A few years ago, I went, you know, the girls in Edinburgh, we go out sometimes, and when you're over 60, you can get discounts. Anyway, you know how it's not about a movie, but you know how when you're often watching a movie and, you know, things are going wrong and the protagonist goes and does something stupid, you know. And of course they have to, otherwise there wouldn't be a play in the first place, you know. But we often find ourselves going, don't go down the basement. So that became the title of this thing. And I started writing it, I remember, on the way home. You know, I just started. It took weeks, you know, in bits to do it. But on the way home, I was zoning up to what we'd done. So it goes like this. It's about drama, so it starts off with a prologue. But don't worry, but anyway. The Festival Theatre, Edinburgh, a touring musical. Cheap seats, girls' night out, no bad at all. OK, the Buddy Holly story wasn't the greatest ever told, but the songs are good. And watching it unfold, the audience are all wishing we could avert disaster. And somehow Buddy could rave on with Stratocaster and play the Morrow Nights gig in Mason City. Not to be, and more's the pity. Rather than thole another 400 mile on an all-school bus with nae heater, Buddy charged you on plane, a rickety four-seater. True, the on winter dance party tour was the tour from hell, but when bad stuff happens, we ken very well the protagonist aye brings it on hissel. Thus, in a whiteout in a cornfield in Iowa, there came a cropper, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens and the Big Bopper. Aye, we're all like, don't do it. Buddy, dinna get on that plane, can you no take a telling? Well, I'll no tell you again. The wife tell you to think on, Buddy. So could you know of bloody thunk? It was snoring like fuck, the propeller fell off and the pilot was drunk. If your name happens to be Kennedy, remember who you are and dinna go bowling down boulevards in Dallas in an open-top car. A beautiful, beautiful white boy with a beautiful black man's voice. That's Elvis. With one swivel of your blue suede shoes, with one thrust of your pelvis, sex enters on TV, the living rooms of America. Pure sex, that's the song you sing. It's vital, it's whole, it's rock and roll, and Elvis, you're the king. But oh, Elvis, your daughter in Graceland was a bloody disgrace. You ended up 42, ballooned, bloated, dead on the toilet, but still off your face on prescription drugs. Oh no, don't go to the chemist. Don't go. Don't let them fill that bloody prescription the bastard wrote you. Do not take that pill. It's probably worse than street heroin. Pills will kill. So many before in since. I'm thinking Judy Garland, Marilyn, Jim Morrison, Michael Jackson, Prince. But hey, if a girl wants to be a princess, deal is become some royal's wife. But if he sniggers and says, whatever in love means, run for your life. For that's not an auspicious beginning for the so-called stuff of fairy tales. It'll just get worse and worse till it's divorce for the Prince and Princess of Wales. And P.S. Diana and Dodie, if you will deny the bloody paparazzi their photo, maybe a speed-free drunk and coked out his head isn't the best chauffeur to go to. The Greeks said tragedy was just like the thing, whereas comedy required the bending of the plot as it unravelled to an unlikely happy ending. In his Poetics, Aristotle said, our fear and pity for the tragic hero and tragic action calls up the cleansing horror of catharsis and brings a certain satisfaction as hubris leads inevitably to nemesis. Aye, when it came to the bit, the Greeks, I had a word or two for it. But enough of all the technical terms, I can't be annoyed thinking up what's the Scots for Schadenfreude. Just Oedipus. Did your ma nor your pa no tell you to body swerve the oracle? Oh dear, oracles very seldom tell you what you wanted to hear. Ariadne, by all means snog Theseus before he goes in to try and kill the Minotaur. Something to put a bit of heart in a boy, but dinna go too far and betray your mother and father with on fatal ball of wool, and then forget to change the black sails to white. Theseus and Ariadne, not cool. Jason, don't underestimate Medea. She'll make you wish you'd never been born, for less ever bairned her. Hell had nae fury, like thon woman scorned. Aye, there's many a fond attraction proves fatal, push comes to shove. Romeo and Juliet, dinna fall in love. Plus, there's poor old King Lear, who's no all there. 3 daughters, ends up out in his ear. Plus, there's poor old King, well, right. Then there's the one where pure evil Iago manipulates poor jealous Moor of Venice, Othello. There's the one with the pushy wife who kills the king. You're not supposed to say his name out loud. Scottish fellow. But of all Shakespeare's protagonists to whom tragic fate did befall, surely Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, was the daddy of them all. After what his father's ghost revealed, you'd think revenge would be in with a shout. No, procrastinating Hamlet would give everything the benefit of the doubt. Nor can we ignore how in all else and o'er, from commoner to king, every bugger could be depended upon to do exactly the wrong thing. Not only embark on a dodgy course of action, but go on with it just to keep up a front. Gertrude, dinna marry Claudius, the man is a cunt. Ophelia, of course he did. More than once, then blamed it on you. You were too young, too busy picking flowers to ken. That's just what men do. Polonius, your platitudes are tedious. You're maybe trying to be helpful, but please, if you will hide and eavesdrop a hint to Aris, don't bloody sneeze. OK, a father's murder demands revenge. But Laertes, dinna hot-foot it back for France, or you too will end up deader than Guildenstern or Rosencrantz. What were your sister Ophelia drowning herself when the pair sale was no the full shilling, and then the whole thing escalating into a pure orgy o' killing? We first of all Hamlet's mammy Gertrude drinking, accidentally from thon poisoned cup. Oh, and Laertes, if you will also poisoned your sword tip. Don't get your foils mixed up. But at least you cliped on Claudius first. And that was the end. Finished. Hamlet, dying, forced him drink the dregs, ran him through with his sword, till at last he expired, his villainy punished. Hamlet, you did think and think again before acting. Did it help you? No one bit. Maybe if shit is determined to happen, it will. This is it.
That was brilliant, and it's also one of your poems that just has so much in it. It's got everything in there because there's so much crossover between sometimes your poetry and your plays, and you know it's words, it's writing at the end of the day, isn't it? It doesn't need to. And you touched on, I mean, obviously with the Greek myths, so many of your plays, and we were talking about Medea.
I've been lucky to get a chance to write things like that. Yeah. But that's the first the phone call kind of job.
Yes.
You know, you get, you know, because that's Sammy Cahn, the songwriter, the American songwriter, you know, one of the great American songbook guys. You know, he wrote things like, I should care, I should let you upset, I should let it upset me, I should care, and I do. You know, he was one of the great Jewish songwriters. He said, people always ask you, you know, if you're a songwriter, what comes first, the words or the music? First the phone call. Otherwise, he wasn't going to do it for nothing, you know.
Well, that's one question asked. I just wondered if anyone in the last few minutes that we've got, if anyone has a question that they would like to ask.
As long as they don't mind if I don't know the answer.
Liz, if she knows the answer. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you want us to. Oh, we've got one question over there, and I'll grab Ruth as well. This question over here. Just this side.
Thanks. Thank you, Liz.
Hi
You
there.
probably remember my father, Tom Dick.
Oh, my wonderful Latin teacher.
Yeah, yeah.
My hero at school. He was fantastic.
Well, as you probably remember, he lived to the grand old age of 102,
That's right.
and he still had all his marbles, but he could only read very, very slowly, and so he took to learning poetry and reciting it off by heart, not just the Euripides. And favourite place was one of the ones that he liked.
Right.
So thank you very much for
Oh,
the wee bit of joy you gave to him. And my question was, I was impressed that you can remember your poems. Can you remember them all?
no, 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 no. No, I can remember that, this, the one for schools, because I've done it so often. And I was hoping that I could remember it, because sometimes you think you remember something, you know, in a kind of impromptu moment, you know, it comes up as part of the conversation, and you don't actually remember it, you know, things that you've been doing for years. But no, and I don't, well, I mean, if I'm doing something dramatic that would let other people down if I didn't come out with the right cue, I'm very sorry that I never got to see him. We were going to go, because I know that he was in Carluke in a home, and my cousin, who still lives there, said, you know, somebody had, you know, been visiting Tom Dick, and he said that he was very proud of my writing, and, you know, that, and I meant to go and see him. And then he just died, you know, it was just the wrong timing. What it tells us all is don't wait, go and see the person, you know.
But you must get that a lot with a lot of your poems, that people have particular attachments to. I know you dedicate the book to your parents and also to Tom, and that's your own personal attachment, but so many people bring their own, you know, sentiments to your poetry.
I mean, I'm very touched that Mr. Dick, to me, would never be told. Well, what was it? He was Big Dick, because he was incredibly tall. He was incredibly tall. We never thought there was any innuendo in that at all. Or at least if there was, I never got it. I never, you know. It was just, he was very, you know, he was very imposing. He was, you know, and I mean, he really looked as if he was the Latin teacher, and he was brilliant. He used to give us Virgil's poetry on a Friday afternoon. I wanted to tell him what a big influence that had been on me, you know. You know, but they were all, you know, these teachers in those days, they were with the black gowns, and they swept along and he was so brilliant. But I was very moved when you said that he liked Favourite Place, which is a poem that I wrote because I was the Macker at the time, and they wanted you to write about your favourite place, and I tried various things, and then tore them all up and just wrote down the truth. And people sometimes ask me to read that one out loud, and I say, no, I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ruth in the front, I think that was a question.
Well, it was really more about your playwriting.
All right.
Your playwriting than about your poetry list.
Right.
I remember bullying you into going to North America with your production of Mary Queen of Scots got her head chopped off. And that's such a
I had no choice about that. Communicado took it there, the company.
It was a brilliant play, and it was a brilliant title for a play, so maybe you could say a bit about it.
That was going to be, it was going to be the 1987. Jerry Mulgrew, who ran a theatre company called Communicado, which was a tuppence halfpenny. It really was poor theatre. You know, it was the clothes were charity shop clothes, and it was, you know, just things like that. Anyway, we knew in about 1985 that Hannah Gordon was going to be doing Schiller's Maria Stuart at the festival that year, you know, the year of 87. And he said, we're going to do a Mary Queen of Scots show. And that's what it was to us all the time. And one day during rehearsals, Jerry came in and he said, I'm sorry, Liz, you'll probably be raging. He said, but I had to go, we were with the publicist, I was at the press for the posters today. And, you know, the guy was doing the type, and he said, what's it called? And I just said, Mary Queen of Scots got her head chopped off, said Jerry McGrew. And he said, you'll probably be mad. And I said, no, that's brilliant, that's perfect. But it still just was the Mary Queen of Scots play to us. You know, not even the play, it was the Mary Queen of Scots show. So it wouldn't have been written like that if I mean, it was cast before it was written. There was these 6 people. One of them was a dancer and wasn't going to, he's a wonderful actor, facially and whatever, but, you know, wasn't a trained speaker. So he became Rizzio. And, you know, I mean, it was just incredibly practical, but it wasn't fun. It was fun at the very end, writing it, but about 3 months before it came out in 1987, Thatcher got back in, and we were all, I remember I'd been up all night and I was going to go over and meet Jerry McGrew, and I was going to tell him that I just, despite all the big box of scenes and things that we got, that we didn't have a show. And he said, well, it's a month till we go and then rehearsal. You know, I mean, anybody in the theatre would know that that's kind of... He said, just go home and just tell yourself it. Say, once upon a time, there was, you know... And I said, all right, we'll try. And he said, no, we'll be all right. Just, we've got all that stuff. And I said, but none of it's any good. He said, there's a whole month. Just let's see. We'll be all right. So I went, yes, he said, just imagine King Lear, you know, done as a once upon a time. You would go, once upon a time, there was a king. And he wanted to get rid of his kingdom. So he divided it amongst his 3 daughters. So he called it up. And he said, just write it like that. So out of that came something that I didn't know I was going to say if I get time to say Corby's opening speech. And this is in memory of Myra McFadden, who died just 2 weeks ago, who was the original La Corby. Country, Scotland. What like is it? It's a peat bog, it's a dark forest. It's a cauldron, a lie, a salt pan or a coal mine. If you're guy lucky, it's a bonny bricht meadow or a park a kye. Or maybe it's a field of stains. It's a tenement house or a humble cot, Princess Street or Paddy's Market. It depends. It depends. I don't ken what like your Scotland is. Here's mine. National flower, the thistle. National pastime, nostalgia. National weather, smer, har, drizzle, snow. I'm not going to go any further, but it ends up, you know, there were 2 queens in the one Green Island, and the one Green Island was split into 2 kingdoms, but nobody in their right mind would insist on that. For the northern kingdom was cold and small, and the people were low-statured and ignorant and feared their lords and poor. They were starving. And their queen was beautiful and tall and fair and Frenchified. The other kingdom in the island was large and prosperous, with beer in her barrels and something. And at the mouth of her greatest river, a great port that sucked all wealth to its centre, which was a palace and a court of a queen. And I can't remember the next. There's one more sentence. But I wasn't, you know.
And there's an answer to your question. Not only does she remember a lot of her poems, she also remembers her plays, and she's able to quote from them.
I remember that one. It's an opening speech. The opening speech of Mary Queen of Scots.
Well,
it became famous, but that's, you know, written and when we went into rehearsal, it wasn't the beginning of the play at that point. It was somewhere in, you know, we ditched the other bits. Yeah. It was wonderful working with Jerry McGrew and that wee group of 6 people at that time.
There's so much that we could talk about. We could be here all day and keep everybody here, but we're not. Oh, we've got one more question there.
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
It's incredible to reflect that, as you said, when that first slim volume came out in the early 70s, that your voice, that voice of yours was the first to sort of be on the shelf, but that was so authentic and has remained so, and so contemporary. And I suppose the question is that I remember a couple of years ago talking to Michael Peterson, who I know is a pal, and him.
I'll see him on Monday.
About you and such an influence, and that although that was the first time that voice in the 70s had gone onto the poetry shelf or whatever, it's remained so real over that time. And I suppose, chatting to Michael about it, I suppose the question is how do you feel that it seems a lot of younger writers and younger poets are still very influenced by you and that voice, and you know
I don't think about that. That's thrilling if it was true, but I don't know that it is. All I'm just trying to do is, you know, write another one. I've only managed to write 2 poems this last year, and both of them were like in blood out of a stone. So maybe it's got, you know, I always think, maybe it's gone. You know, you don't have, there's one thing kind of been milling about for ages, but until I get the idea of what the sort of way in is, you know, some words clash together or another idea from somewhere quite else joins together and you get a kind of fuse, like and then, but you don't know if you'll ever get another one. I've never known. I mean, when I was writing the poems that are in this, I never, you know, and there would be big gaps, you know.
Well, I'm glad you didn't run out of ideas for here, because that proves that there was obviously much poetry to put in there.
But maybe it's gone.
Well, I hope it hasn't, and
Well,
I'm sure
I hope so
it hasn't.
too, but
I'm sure it hasn't. Normally at this stage we'd be sort of saying that Liz would be doing some signings, but we're going to, I think, postpone that till later, is that right?
12 o'clock.
Till 12 o'clock. And also at that point, I think Liz is going to do a little bit extra.
Yeah.
So you get a little bit extra helping to step into the breach to fill for Alex Gray, who's not able to be here today. So slight change of circumstances. Hope you'll all be hanging around anyway, and you'll get the chance to meet Liz and have your book signed and hear a bit more. But in the meantime, if I could say a big thank you to Liz Lochhead.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for cheering me up. I was in a bit of a state when I got here because I'm a new woman now. Thanks very much.